in an extremely awkward situation politically and in relation to the rest of the world, in relation to the Islamic world. And it tends to reinforce what General Petraeus and Admiral Mullen had said a couple months ago, that the policies that the U.S. was pursuing in relation to the Palestinian-Israel conflict was hurting American efforts elsewhere in the region and in Asia, and particularly in the Islamic world, that quite literally this unconditional support for Israel was costing American lives. And it has been said, the only lobby more powerful than AIPAC is the Pentagon. And there seems to be some shift in that orientation, though it hasn't come clearly to the surface. Let me end by just relating what I've been saying about the Palestine-Israel conflict to this broader legitimacy war thesis. Because really what I'm trying to express is that since 2006, since the Lebanon war, Israel has done a series of things that have, in a sense, relinquished almost the totality of the high moral ground to the Palestinians. And even before this incident this week, there was a growing global boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign that, of course, has gotten a surge of additional support as a result of these events. So what the Palestinians are increasingly doing themselves is to shift their tactics from hard power to soft power. That doesn't mean they've become Gandhians or even Mandela followers of his approach. But what they have done is to recognize, I think increasingly, that their future depends on winning the legitimacy war. And it's clear that if you win the legitimacy war, you don't necessarily gain the political outcome that you seek. For instance, Tibet has won the legitimacy war in relation to China, but it hasn't been able, because of the particular circumstances, to achieve a political outcome that would correspond to that victory, nor has the Chechens, nor arguably the Kashmiris. I mean, there are a lot of situations where it can't be translated into a political outcome. But what does seem clear, that short of extermination, a hard power approach to conflict resolution cannot succeed in this part of the early 21st century. And now the Palestinians have the benefit of very deep and wide support within the United Nations. They have the benefit of the solidarity of civil society initiatives all over the world, and they're gaining much more public support here in this country. The Beltway is the last to know, and how you somehow change the way Congress approaches these issues and the way the Washington think tanks and the mainstream media is a tremendously, what shall I say, there's a tremendously dysfunctional attachment to this unconditional relationship to Israel that is contrary to not only moral and political values, but also is extremely damaging to America's leadership in the world, its own sense of itself. It has to go to, it has to distort its own commitments to things like the rule of law in order to protect the impunity of Israel and to avoid accountability for the kinds of violations of international law that it has been guilty of. Typical was its reaction to the Goldstone Report, which is a very scrupulous, fact-finding report with some recommendations that was made by a distinguished group of 4 international specialists on the violations of international law during the Gaza war of a year ago. And without any effort to look at the substance of the report, Congress instructed the President to oppose it in every possible way by an overwhelming vote. One can say with some pride, I suppose, that our local congressman was one of the 35 that voted against that, but 400 or so voted in favor of this, and they just had an equally one-sided vote to give Israel some additional military support for a missile defense system, which was voted by something like 412 to 5, and sends you can imagine the message that is sent by that kind of vote to the rest of the world, and particularly to the world that surrounds Israel. And now with Turkey being enraged by what happened in the Mediterranean, there is a very different political climate. What happens in that political climate, only the future will tell. But I think the way to understand this phase of the Palestinian struggle is through the optic of a legitimacy war. And the Palestinians have the high moral ground, they have the global movement. How Israel responds to that and how it plays out is something that requires much more intelligence than I possess to anticipate.
I doubt that. We need you as a negotiator. We need you as a negotiator.
I'm not sure that would be very popular in Washington. Much less Tel Aviv. But let me stop there, and I probably talked too long, and certainly too incoherently, but I welcome your question.